Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, a show in which we will give you facts, we will give you opinions, but unlike all the other radio and TV shows, this is the one where you get to have your say as well. So Thursday and Friday of last week, Mrs. May was there at the European Summit. Did you see that photograph of her sitting on her own at a table, waiting for the big boys like Juncker to come into the room? How did she get on? Well, you could argue that the language that was being used by at least some of the other leaders was a little more conciliatory than perhaps we'd heard before, though I notice from Monsieur Barnier and Monsieur Juncker, nothing very friendly at all was said. And we now hear that David Davis is hopping on Eurostar tomorrow morning and going to meet the French government in another attempt to try to get them to give more concessions. It would appear that the divorce bill, as it's being called, is a major stumbling block before they will even lower themselves to come and talk to us about a future trade deal. And if that wasn't difficult enough, she's got some big battles on the home front too. And Keir Starmer today, Sir Keir Starmer, who is, of course, the shadow Brexit minister, he has laid out 6 red lines that he wants to see as part of the Brexit bill, you know, the Great Repeal Act, that has to go through the House of Commons. The trouble is, it isn't just Labour that will support the idea, in particular, that Parliament should have the final say on whatever deal. Of course, the SNP will support it, the Liberal Democrats will support it, but equally, people like Ken Clarke and Anna Soubry will support it. Can the government actually get this through without an amendment, perhaps, that says that Parliament must have the final say? And so what I'm going to debate here with you this morning is, do you trust Parliament to have the final say on whether to take us out of the European Union? And you can answer me on that by calling 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And you can, of course, not only watch on Facebook Live, but comment there too. So, to try and help us through all of this, I'm going to a proper expert. His name is Bruno Waterfield. He's the Brussels correspondent for The Times. He was there at the summit on Thursday and Friday, and he is, I hope you won't mind me saying, Bruno, something of a Brussels veteran. How many of these summits, Bruno, have you been to over the years?
Oh, I don't care to think about it.
Right.
It's 15 years worth. I've never been called a proper expert before. No,
well, okay.
I'm not quite sure how to take it.
Well, except veteran then, if nothing else.
Okay.
Help us through this, because, I mean, I've obviously got my own point of view. You know, I felt it was a pretty dismal performance at the summit, and I've been reading Tory-supporting newspapers on Saturday talking about breakthrough and what a marvellous day the Prime Minister had had. I mean, give me your assessment. What kind of summit do you think Mrs May had?
Well, I think it was a summit where they didn't want to kick her when she's down, and the reason why they don't want to kick her when she's down is she might not get up again, and they might end up with Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson particularly exercises the imagination of the Germans, who really don't like him because of comments he's made comparing the EU to some kind of Nazi project. So it was all about, making sure that she wasn't too humiliated by playing a lot of lip service to what she said in her speech in Florence, when she made some pretty big concessions and didn't really get anything in return for them. So what they decided to do was something they're going to have to do anyway, and something that Michel Barnier wanted to do anyway, something that countries like the Netherlands and Belgium, Denmark, and possibly even France have a lot of trading links with Britain, were very keen on, was to try and start, they call it scoping. It's a horrible word. But
how very Brussels, eh?
Technical, it's a technical term for working out trade agreements, and particularly working out this transition that people like Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, are very keen on. But they were probably going to do that anyway. And the problem that Theresa May has, and she had at the summit, is that basically the EU pocketed what she said at Florence. They just put it in their pocket and said, right, give us some more. And that's why she's still under pressure. That's why she didn't get what she wanted, which was this declaration of sufficient progress in response to a speech allowing them to move on to the next level. And she didn't get that, and she's under pressure, particularly on the money. And the reason she's under pressure on the money is the money is one thing that EU can really agree on. They're all a bit split on trade, actually, and trade with Britain. But when it comes to getting more money out of Britain, there's total unity.
And, in your view, what do we owe once we've left the European Union?
Well, we'll probably never know. We'll probably never know the full amount because no one wants to write it down. Michel Barnier won't want it written down because some people say he hasn't got enough out of Britain. And the Brits won't want it written down because it's very embarrassing and rather contentious within the government cabinet. It depends how you calculate it. Most people believe that in her Florence speech, when she said after Brexit, no government would be worse off, no project would be worse off, no one would have to pay more into the budget. That promise cost around about 23 billion euros. Mm-hmm. Then there's something really horrible and incomprehensible called the resta liquide, which are these very long-term commitments in the budget. There's contingent liabilities, as they're called, such as the pensions to be paid for Eurocrats in the decades after Brexit, which the EU says Britain is on the hook for. When you add that money in, you're adding in at least some 40 billion. So the total bill, according to one very, very senior EU diplomat on Friday afternoon, is about 60 billion euros. Most people think the total bill will come in at around 40 to 50 billion euros. Now, it's important to note that the divorce bill isn't as such new money that Britain will pay, in the sense that it's in the Treasury estimates. It's the money that Britain would have paid eventually had it stayed in the EU, but obviously for Brexit voters, it doesn't mean that money will be coming back. It will be
no. And what about our assets, Bruno? What about our investments in the European Investment Bank? I mean, surely this can't all be negative, can it?
Well, the really interesting little fact out of the negotiations is Britain hasn't even talked about the assets. Yes, it's leaving the assets until last, and this is probably quite cunning because logically, and Green MEPs, your colleague Philippe Lambert has pointed this out before. Logically, if Britain is on the hook for liabilities, historical liabilities, and future liabilities, think of those very, very generous pensions that we'll be paying to retired MEPs and retired European civil servants. If Britain is on the hook for those, then presumably Britain gets a share of the assets as well. How can Britain be on the hook for future and past liabilities
without the assets?
Not entitled to a share of assets that have been built up over the past and into the future.
And given
that's an interesting question, and I think they're just leaving. I think they're leaving that one until last. So that's it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And Bruno, tell me, what do you think the prospects are of, by the end of this year, us actually being involved, not in the prospect or the scoping of what trade talks may be? What hope is there of us being in trade talks by the end of the year, in your view? Well, just before the summit, and the summits do tend to be rather pre-cooked, an ambassador from, he didn't want his country to be named, an ambassador said that he thought it was 50-50. So, toss a coin in the air. And you might know. Just last week, Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, the guy who chairs the summits and a very important player, a very canny mover, he said that if there wasn't this stage in December, the staging post in December, they'd have to rethink again where they were heading. They'd have to actually think, is this working? Is this process working? So December is going to be very, very important. I think it is a bit of tossing a coin in the air. On the EU side, they are not united. They declare how united they are, which should tell you how fragile it all is. And they're also in no rush, are they? Push on the money. It seems to me that from Monsieur Barnier's perspective as the chief negotiator, the more he can string us out, the better in some ways. Well, in one sense it is, but you've got to bear in mind there are some countries, the Netherlands particularly,
France too, though. The Calais railhead is 31.5 million tonnes of freight every year, and they're beginning to get a little bit nervous, very nervous, in fact, as we go into the new year. They go into the new year without any kind of certainty.
Yeah.
It's going to be very, very difficult for companies to issue contracts, even airline tickets and all the rest.
Absolutely.
So a lot of countries are beginning to get a little bit jumpy. They're beginning to say to Barnier, come on,
Yeah.
we're getting worried.
Bruno Waterfield, Brussels correspondent for The Times, thank you very much for your thoughts and views and all of this. Well, it sounds a bit like we're stuck in treacle, really, doesn't it? We're not really getting anywhere. Things are tough there, but in some ways, things are beginning to get even tougher at home as Keir Starmer puts forward his 6 red lines, the key one being that they will not vote for the Brexit bill, the Great Repeal bill, that the government's putting ahead, unless Parliament, not ministers, get the final say on our deal or no deal, whatever it may be. And of course there are plenty of Tories who will also support that position. So I'm asking you this morning, do you trust Parliament to have a final say on this? Let me tell you, I don't. The political class have learnt nothing from the referendum of last year. They want to stop Brexit, and if this goes back at the end of all of this, for the Commons to have a final say, whatever the deal is, the chances are they will reject it, because they want to keep us inside the European Union. They'll reject it, and they could even bring the government down. We voted to leave. No ifs, no buts. As Sir Keir Starmer from the Labour Party piles pressure on the government and seeks to form an alliance with rebels sitting on the Tory backbenches, it may well be that Parliament does finish up getting the final say on whatever Brexit deal we do or do not get. And I'm asking you, would you trust Parliament to have that final say? I could even say, would you trust our political class? Could I not? Gary in Tamworth is my first call of the morning. Hello.
Hello, Nigel. It's great to talk to you finally. I've been a staunch kipper for years.
Right. So
I'm still a staunch kipper.
Yeah.
We're still going.
So do you, given that you're a proper Eurosceptic, would you trust a deal or no deal to go back to the House of Commons?
I wouldn't trust them as far as I could chuck Tony Blair.
Right.
The problem we've got is we've got 4 out of the 6 of the cabinet discussing Brexit with the EU are Remainers.
Yep.
You've got 70% of the MPs are Remainers that are trying to keep us in. To me, it's like the cabinet. It's like having Churchill having Lord Orr and Oswald Mosley on the cabinet during the war.
Right. Well, that's a very graphic.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Very graphic way of looking at it, Gary. So you don't trust. I mean, do you think if it did go back to Parliament, do you feel that the Brexit vote could be betrayed?
Yes, definitely. Well, it will be. I know it will be. It's a certainty.
Right.
Because they want to remain.
They want to remain. So that effectively, Gary, that would overturn the referendum, wouldn't it?
Yep. They ain't bothered.
I tell you what, Gary, stay there a second. I've got somebody else on, Peter in Wimbledon, who I'm told's got a very different view. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Nigel, what I'd like to say is you're one of the biggest conmen and hypocrites in the history of British politics.
Oh, right. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you. And a very good start to the call. And they're both, they are both actually very high accolades indeed. Do continue.
Yeah, well, my point is, as far as I remember, we live in parliamentary democracy. We elect our parliamentarians to act on our behalf and to do what's in the best interest of the country and ordinary people. Not like yourself, you know. You said after the referendum, you're stepping aside. You're going to Brussels. You're going to be negotiating.
But Peter, do we trust Parliament? Do we trust Parliament?
This is a system. What would you suggest? We abandon our democracy, or we just choose?
I'll tell you what we do, Peter. I'll tell you what we do. I'll tell you what we did. Under normal circumstances, you're right. Under normal circumstances, we elect our MPs for a 5-year period to act in our interests. You know, that is the form of representative democracy by which this country is governed. However, a huge exception was made here, because Parliament decided that on this fundamental constitutional question, it wasn't representatives that would decide it, it was us, the people, that decided it. And surely, given that situation, isn't it for those representatives now to respect the wishes of the people.
The wishes of 52% of brainwashed and deluded by people like you.
Oh dear, this is very poor quality stuff, isn't it? Peter, really, I mean, you may not like the outcome of the referendum, but there were some very powerful arguments as to why we should leave. It wasn't all fake news or smoke and mirrors. There were some strong arguments, Peter, such as we should govern our own country. I mean, what's wrong with that as an argument?
Well, in order for us to get behind you guys, people like you, what you need to do, guys, on the Leave side, you should come up clean with all your lies, what you sold to the British...
I tell you what, Peter, I tell you what. You give me one lie that I told in the referendum. Just give me one.
Well, you stood in front of that poster saying about Syrian refugees coming to this country. Where are they?
Oh, I stood in front of a poster exposing Merkel's madness, and look at the impact it's having on European politics everywhere. And absolutely, and when you look, Peter, at the insanity of those photographs, the way that it has really, really upset tens of millions of people in Europe, I completely stand by that slogan, the EU has failed us all.
What has it got to do with the United Kingdom, Nigel? You're not answering the question.
Peter, once someone's got a European passport, they're entitled to come to Britain. Simple as. Sorry, tell me, you were going to give me a lie. Please give me a lie.
Well, I've given you one. And there are so many...
No, you haven't.
On the other side,
no, you haven't.
Have a deal with the European Union. The deal's going to be so easy to make because they need us more than we need them. Since the Brexit, Nigel, if you check, standard of living's gone down, and you should know that better than anyone. Yeah, the people. No,
actually, thankfully, wages have, after over 10 years of being very depressed, started to go up. The stock market's near at an all-time high. Exports are good. There's a lot more good news out there than bad. Peter, thank you. And I challenge anyone: tell me any lie I told in that referendum, and you won't find one. You may not agree with it, but it wasn't lies. And this has almost become the establishment excuse for the revolution of 2016. In America, it has to be the Russians. Trump could not possibly have won unless the Russians had interfered. And in this country, Brexit only won because people were lied to, apparently. Tim is calling from Bishop Stortford. Tim, good morning. Do you trust our MPs and our political class to have this final decision?
Well, the simple answer to that, Nigel, is no, of course not. Basically, what we've got to remember, and this hasn't changed, that the majority of the members of Parliament, whether they're Labour, Conservative or whatever, don't want to leave the EU.
Yep.
And their views haven't changed. We've even got a Prime Minister who's admitted she doesn't believe in the Brexit cause, and she's supposed to be fighting our corner. The previous caller that made, I think, the rather unfortunate connection with Mosley during the war, but it's very similar. We've got somebody, the people that are leading their campaign to negotiate a position don't actually believe in it.
It is a very odd thing, Tim, I must admit. I was talking yesterday to a long-term Eurosceptic who, like me, left the Conservative Party over 25 years ago. He said, isn't it ironic that we fought this lonely battle for a quarter of a century, we got to a referendum, we got over the line, and now, of course, the people running it are the very people we've been fighting for 25 years, and so that is a real problem. Do you think Brexit could be betrayed, Tim?
Honestly, I believe that there's a strong possibility that Parliament will attempt to stop it at some stage. And, it is ironic, isn't it? We've been in the EU all these years, and all these laws, directives and regulations we've rubber-stamped through Parliament. Not one MP has spoken up about talking about them. Now, suddenly, every minutiae they want control of, which I find is incredibly hypocritical.
Yeah, no,
I'm really worried.
I get that, Tim. I get that, Tim. And I'm even more angry, Tim, in terms of breach of trust and faith. They were elected on manifestos. On manifestos that said, both Tory and Labour manifestos said, leave the European Union, leave the single market, end free movement of people, and here we are, a few months down the line, and they're prepared to completely turn turtle on it. Tim, I thank you for your call. On Facebook, Peter says, it looks like the EU will have its cake and eat it. Darryl says, stop the talking, let's get walking. Anthony says, no, we don't trust them. We want to move forward, not 200 years backwards. Chris says, I trust the Parliament more than majority general public, to be honest, that's at a push. Conrad says, where's the plan, Nigel? You've campaigned for years to quit, and you should have been in there with the government sharing your plans. Conrad, they don't want to talk to me. They are, after all, as been said already this morning, nearly all Remainers. Nearly all Remainers. And even the Leavers only came out as Leavers in the last few months, and in many cases they appear now to have compromised quite a few of the things they stood for during the campaign, such as cabinet ministers who are Leavers supporting the concept of a transition period, delaying this years and years and years down the line. Andrew is calling me from Docklands. Andrew, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Nigel. I don't think that, I don't trust the Parliament to have the say at all. It seems that for us, that as people are sort of woken up to what they are really like. They're not looking after the people. They're looking after their own careers, and they're also looking after the high prices that corporations and the people in control of the marketplace can actually charge. Prices would drop, and I think free competition across the whole of the EU would bring up all of those smaller countries, and those smaller countries would come up to our standard instead of us taking all of their skilled people and then chucking aid at them.
Which we have done, haven't we? We have done. This never ever gets mentioned, Andrew, is the effect that mass migration has actually had on some of those countries. I'll share a story with you. I was in Lithuania a couple of years ago at a big conference, and I was talking to the Prime Minister of Lithuania, and I said, come on, how many people have left Lithuania since you joined the European Union? It's over 20% of the population. And amongst that are nearly all their graduates in law, in economics, and in medicine. So a lot of these countries, like Lithuania, Andrew, have literally been stripped out of all their talent.
Yes, and the thing is, the capital flows would go to those countries that have got the talented people. If we didn't stop bringing them here, which is really what's happening, we're trying to gain an advantage, or the political class and the corporate class are trying to gain a huge advantage and crush small countries instead of letting everybody come to the same standard under their own steam, and that's the way to do it.
When you examine it, Andrew,
it's so important.
When you examine it, it's not that pretty a European Union at all, is it? Andrew from Docklands, I thank you. A lot of parliamentarians are now saying they think Parliament, not ministers, should have the final decision over whatever deal we do or do not get from the European Union. And given the current pace of progress, it's very optimistic, very difficult to be optimistic about a particularly good deal. That may be the case, it may not. But should Parliament have that say? Do we trust our politicians to have that say? Or could it be used by our career political class to effectively overturn the Brexit result and perhaps in the process even bring the government down? Well, much as our politicians are becoming more pro-EU, certainly a lot more pro-EU than the manifestos they were elected on back on June the 8th, across the rest of Europe, we're seeing a very different picture. The elections last weekend in Austria saw the Conservative Party, who certainly want quite strong immigration controls, top the polls, but we also saw the Freedom Party, very hardline Eurosceptics, getting 26% of the vote. And overnight, we've got the results in from the Czech general election, and a populist billionaire called Mr. Babis and his party have won the election, and they've won it by a mile. They've got 30% of the vote, and the next nearest party is on about 10% of the vote. He is saying that the European Union needs to learn the lessons of Brexit, and he wants strict immigration controls. And it isn't just his party with that kind of line that's done well. Another party, which is very hardline Eurosceptic, but equally very strongly anti-Islam, they've come third in the election. So once again, what we see are traditional parties like the Social Democrats in the Czech Republic, the pro-EU party, collapsing down to 7% of the vote. The revolution of 2016 is still rolling. It's still happening. I know that Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton and others don't want to believe it. Look at the figures. It's still happening. Europe is moving, not just to the right, but it's moving in a very, very firmly Eurosceptic direction. Mrs. Merkel's folly of saying anyone that wants to come will be welcome has fundamentally changed European politics. Of that, I've got no doubt at all. So, Sandra, in Bedford, would you trust Parliament with a final say on whatever deal Theresa May gets.
Well, hello, Nigel.
Good morning.
I'd appreciate some honesty, even for MPs whose constituents voted to leave, and if the MPs think it. My problem that I never realised when I voted to leave, Nigel. I never realised that. I never looked down the line and thought, how will Parliament agree all these new laws, rules, and regulations? Our Parliament can't agree on anything now. So why is it's not even, it's huge. I can't even understand how we're ever going to get anything new in place.
Well, I mean, when you voted to leave, Sandra, you didn't vote for any particular economic model or new trade deal, did you? You just voted to leave.
I voted to leave, but I was silly though, because we don't know what we're voting for. I didn't know what I was voting for. It was lovely, it sounded good, but now I don't think it is the right way for us.
So would you like us to rejoin the European Union and and head towards a European... Oh, joining the Euro, of course, would be part of it, because Mr Juncker's very keen on that now. It's going to be compulsory, and we'd have to join a European army. I mean, that's the point, Sandra, isn't it? That either you want to be part of this political union or you don't. That's the real fundamental choice.
Well, yeah, I tell you what, really, the choice is we're not Great Britain anymore. We're just a little island. And Europe they will succeed. And I think to fall out with them and constantly hammer them and hate them like you are.
So are they succeeding in Catalonia today, Sandra?
Sorry?
Do you think the European Union is succeeding in Catalonia when it completely refuses to condemn 900 people being assaulted and wounded by the Spanish police?
But the trouble with you, Nigel, you make it sound so easy. Everything sounds so easy. I feel sorry for every MP and the House of Lords having to deal with this really tricky situation. And I take my hat off to you. You're great on the radio, but you walked away from politics.
No, Sandra. I'm leading a group in the European Parliament. I've been giving speeches all over Europe over the course of the last few months. Yeah. I'm trying to encourage European businesses to put pressure on their leaders to get them to move towards some sensible trade talks. I haven't walked away, Sandra, at all.
Okay, yeah, but you're dangerous.
I know, because I've got these ideas about democracy and the nation and identity. And actually, you're quite right. When it comes to the economics of this, it's complicated. But the big choice, actually, is the simplest choice that we've ever faced in our lives. Did we wish to be part of a political union called the EU, or to leave it and to be an independent, self-governing nation? And that, Sandra, was the big choice, was it not?
It was a choice, but what do we do instead then? Who do we...
We govern ourselves rather than being governed by Mr Juncker. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that.
Do you not think we're going to have to barter for our trade deals and please Peter
We've got please Paul... Do you know what, Sandra? The whole world is queuing up to do trade deals with us, and 85% of the global economy is outside the Eurozone. Of course I want us to have a grown-up, sensible trade deal with our next-door neighbours in Europe. The people getting in the way of that at the moment are Juncker, Barnier and Verhofstadt. Sandra, I thank you for your call. I've got to move on to David in Kilburn. David, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning. So, do we trust Parliament to decide this in the end?
No, we don't.
Okay.
I can't believe what's going on. I think they should walk out of all of this trade deal negotiations as well. I mean, this is a great country, Nigel. And the way...
Sandra, David, Sandra, who was on before you, said we're just a little country, we're not Great Britain. You disagree with that, yeah?
Oh, no. Oh, we are a great country. Look at our universities. The greatest on the top 10s. Come on. The European Union is run by France and Germany. Look at it.
Mm-hmm.
We got no say in it. And I voted to leave. And I think Parliament should respect what we voted for. Leave the European Union. And that's what we voted for. And that's what I want to see.
Okay.
And I think Mrs.
No, fine, David, you couldn't be clearer. And just finally, one quick question for you, David.
Yeah.
Would you continue, as Theresa May is, with these endless rounds of negotiations, or do you feel perhaps we're kind of wasting our time with this and we should simply walk away?
I think we should walk out of this. It's nonsense. Look at Malta. Who is Malta telling us all this? Malta is just a small fish. And look at what they're saying. Come on, we need to walk out of this and start doing our own thing and make this country great as it should be.
Make Britain great again, says David in Kilburn. Where have I heard that before? Thank you. Richard is calling me from Mansfield. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, what do you think? Should Parliament have the final say?
Yes, I do. Well, the reason I think they do is because I think we've really rushed this idea through a bit too fast, and I think what's happened is now, as soon as you ask that question, should they have the final say, people straight away panic that it's going to be overturned. And I think what's happened is from when David Cameron said that, as soon as the referendum, as soon as we vote to leave, going to issue Article 50, as soon as he said that, and he didn't, people started to panic that the government would try to overturn it. And what's happened as a result is we've rushed things through without planning properly.
Well, Richard, just answer those 2 points very quickly. Firstly, on fears of this being overturned, look, let's be frank, the Labour Party fought on a manifesto of getting us out of everything, including the single market, taking back border controls. They've completely gone, Richard, 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So anyone that fears things being overturned just need to look at what Corbyn's done, and they've got a right to be concerned. And you say we've rushed this, but come on, Theresa May didn't trigger Article 50 for 9 months, did she?
Yeah, no, and I think that's fine if you're not going to trigger Article 50, because you've got to remember, you know, we didn't have a Brexit secretary when she first came in, so yes, she did need time to implement things. Changing, I don't mind Labour changing their mind, and I don't mind people changing their minds, because that's what happens when you don't wish things.
Richard, 4 months after a general election, and you change it round the most fundamental question facing the country today by 180 degrees. That's not very straight dealing, is it?
No, but at the end of the day, we want a good deal. I mean, regardless of the or the detail, we want a good deal, and I think fundamentally you need to plan for it, and we haven't planned for it, and I think that's what will, in the end. Well, if we do get a bad deal, it won't be because it was a bad idea. It's because we've tried to rush things instead of actually just sitting. And I can understand why people have been really nervous about actually sitting there.
What a pity, Richard. What a pity that David Cameron and George Osborne did not have some plans in place, a plan B, in case the referendum went the way they didn't want. But of course, there was none of that. They were so arrogant, they believed they were simply going to win. So if Parliament gets the final say on whatever the Brexit deal is or is not, what would that actually mean? Well, what it would mean, I suspect, is they would move very quickly to a motion of confidence debate in the government. We'd probably finish up, ultimately, being forced into having another referendum, would be my guess, because that's what the parties would have to say at the next election to get people to vote for them. I don't trust Parliament on this one little bit, and I really do think just a few months after the general election, on which nearly all of them were elected on manifestos that said we were going to leave the single market, take back control of our borders, I really think this is perhaps in terms of a breach of trust between the governors and the governed, potentially about the most serious thing that has happened for a very long time in this country. Hi, Nigel, do we trust Parliament? Lol, says Tony. Laugh a lot. He clearly doesn't, and I must admit, that's a little bit the way that I feel. If you don't trust Parliament to have the final say on Brexit, then what's the point of having elections or a Parliament at all, says Lewis in Thornton Heath. Lewis, I've explained that once before. We have a form of representative democracy where once every 4 or 5 years, we vote for the men and women to represent us and make decisions on our behalf. They then come before us at the end of that term and say, you know, how have I done? Is it good enough or isn't it good enough? But in this case, the referendum was given to us on Brexit. That decision was subcontracted out from Parliament to us, and we made the decision. And surely surely they should hold faith with that decision. That's certainly my view. On Twitter, I thought Parliament basically said that we can make this decision when we ask the people. Well, yes, of course, and that's what I thought too. Maureen's calling from Leeds. Maureen, do you trust our political class?
Not so much, I'll be honest with you. Hello, Nigel.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. But the main thing I would like to say before I say anything else is we never voted to join the European Union, the EU. We voted to join the EEC, the European Economic Community.
Yep.
And it's been a big lie all the way through,
quite right.
You know,
quite right.
We certainly never voted for them to make all our rules and regulations, which is what's been happening, you know. And this is why I voted to come out when we have the opportunity to do so, you know.
Do you know, Maureen, when they talk about lies, what they really talk about is Boris and the 350 million a week figure, which should have been a little bit lower. And they say our side have lied. Maureen, what you've just said is absolutely my feeling too. I think the establishment have been lying to us for 50 years about this.
Well, I think so too. You've got to think it's a case of numbers. The number of immigrants that were coming in, and I'm not a bit racist, I'll be honest with you. We couldn't cope with the sheer numbers because it was affecting our housing, our education, particularly the health service. You know now when you need treatment, you have to wait months and months and months because we're trying to deal with so many people in the country, you know.
Well, that was certainly one of the factors, Maureen, and it was a massive factor, and it was probably the biggest factor because of the impact. Because of the impact it had on, you know, public services and everything else, and wages. But the real issue, Maureen, is, you know, we're just a few months on from a general election when they all got elected on manifestos that said they'd take us out. Now the Labour Party and others are changing their mind. Would you trust them? Would you trust them if it went back to Parliament for a final say? Would you trust them to hold faith with the electorate?
No, I wouldn't, to be honest with you. No.
No. OK. No, Maureen, thank you. Maureen wouldn't trust them. Salah is calling from Perryvale. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
I do agree that the Parliament has the right to vet the deal.
Right.
This is what we are voting them for. This is the job. After all, Tony Blair, with a big majority, he took us into the Gulf War while all the public opinion was against it. Tony Blair put a hold on the 7 years which all the EEs and the EU members have to wait until they have the freedom of movement, and he abandoned it, and they had a majority. This is what democracy works.
Normally, Salah, I would agree with you entirely that we vote for a parliament, and from within that parliament a government, and their job is pretty much to get on with it. And I understand that and I get that. But do you agree with me that this is an exceptional circumstance where that big decision was subcontracted out for us to make? And surely, Salah, if we've made that decision, shouldn't it be respected?
Mr. Farage, the referendum is advisory. The Parliament has contracted out to us. We, the public, 48 and 52% is a very small majority. But this is democracy. We have to be out of the EU, even though I voted Remain, but I prefer to go to the EEC. I quite like what you said when you were campaigning, when you said we don't have to be politically united with Europe to do trade. This was a very good statement you made.
Yeah, well, let's hope our government can negotiate it. Salah, I thank you very much indeed for your call. I'm going to go to Carol in Folkestone. Carol, good morning to you. Would you trust this decision to go back to Parliament? Do you think...
Can I just come in and say to you that as far as I understand, the EU doesn't recognise referendums. Now, it seems to me that we're just being ignored. The UK's referendum was taken, and as you know, many people actually backed it. Catalonia it's more brutal for these people when they were looking for independence, but it just seems to me that it's just being ignored.
Well, the point is that, of course, that Denmark voted against the Maastricht Treaty, was forced to vote again. Ireland twice in the last 20 years voted against European treaties and were asked to vote again. And when the French and the Dutch voted against the European Constitution, they just rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty and continued. So they've got no great record, as you say, of respecting referendums. And indeed, Juncker's made it clear since our referendum, he never wants to see another referendum in Europe on any European issue. He wants to trust the political class. But my question, Carol, is about our Parliament and our MPs. if this final decision goes back to them, do you think they will hold faith with the way the British people voted, or do you think a great Brexit betrayal could be 18 months, 2 years down the line?
Well, surely, if they actually go against what their constituents looked for, and if they actually vote to sort of carry on being within the EU and going against their people, they're going to be out of a seat. Surely they can't be so short-sighted.
You may well be right, Carol from Folkestone. Thank you. And following on from that theme, I get by text, the vote on the final deal is just a way of trying to stay in the EU. I think Starmer is a cuckoo in the Labour nest. Stabbing 4 or 5 million voters in the back is not the way to win the next election. Some Labour MPs will be very nervous about this. And I have to say, I think in the Midlands, the North, South Wales, particularly in those areas where there was a big Labour Brexit vote, I think potentially there's quite a lot of Labour MPs could be very vulnerable to this indeed. And my last caller on this subject is Pat, who's calling from Holton Regis. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Right, I like to, this myth that we get 52% and 48% that's banned around by the Remainers and the media. If you put it into votes itself, it was 1,261,000, which is very significant, more than 52% and 48% that comes across.
Mm-hmm.
And also, no, I've got no trust or faith in our government or the opposition. Now, the mandate was handed to the government from the people of this country to negotiate coming out.
Yep.
And all we've seen is this woolliness of, we're going to give the EU something back, and we didn't vote for that. Now, if you put it on the other shoe when there's an election, if there's an election and the Tories won the election, you don't go back to Labour and say, well, you've got the mandate. They lost it.
They did?
It's the Tories. The Tories carry that election. The Tories carry on our negotiations, but the Tories have got to remember that Leave campaigners are leaving. We want to leave. There's no discussion on that.
We want to leave. There's no discussion. I thank you for that. And you've had the final word on that. I totally agree. Well, from Article 50 to Article 155. Yes, Spain's Prime Minister has said he's going to impose direct rule on Catalonia. Catalan leader Charles Puigdemont has said this attempt by Spain to humiliate Catalonia is an attack on democracy. But do you agree that this is an attack on democracy, or is it Spanish law simply being obeyed? If you're worried about the implications for democracy, call me on 0345 6060973. Perhaps you think Spanish law must be upheld at all costs, in which case text to 84850. Or perhaps you think Spain and Catalonia should have a referendum to sort it all out, in which case tweet Farage and LBC at LBC. Well, the Catalonian leader has said that Spain's attempt to humiliate his region is an attack on democracy. It's as the country's Prime Minister says, there will be new elections to the Catalan Parliament, probably in 6 months' time, and that the removal of the region's autonomy following its independence referendum is going to happen pretty soon. Just before we came on air this morning, I spoke to James Badcock, who is a freelance reporter in Madrid, and I began by asking him to explain to us what Article 155 is all about.
It's part of the Spanish Constitution, so it's the 40-year-old Spanish Constitution, and it's never actually been used in anger, as it were, in 40 years. And what it does is it gives, it's very vaguely worded, we've never seen it used before, it gives a government, which has to be supported by the Senate, the upper house of Parliament, the power, basically it can use necessary measures to bring into line any regional authority in Spain, which is, outside the law, which is doing something which is overstepping its powers, as is the case in Catalonia, which has, held a referendum which wasn't legal, and is talking about declaring independence. So it's very vague, and this government has, yesterday, was drawn up its plans of how it wants to use 155, and I think we're all quite shocked today at how harsh the measures could be.
So the Prime Minister, Rajoy, will put this to the Senate at some point this week, is that right?
Yeah, on Friday. It's already been arranged that the vote will be on Friday, and Mr. Rajoy's Popular Party has a majority already. But on top of that, for extra political support. He's got the opposition socialists and the fourth largest party, Ciudadanos, to support these measures.
So this gets passed on Friday. What happens next Saturday? Does the Spanish government literally just go in and take over all the buildings in Catalonia, the government buildings?
Well, yes. I mean, how it will physically play out is what could be fascinating and could be slightly alarming. But in theory, on Saturday it will be published in a state bulletin that this power has been passed, and that basically the Catalan government, all of them, the ministers, the vice president, and President Puigdemont, will be dismissed.
This almost sounds third world. I thought Spain was a modern democracy. I mean, surely the Catalans have a right, do they not, to express an opinion?
Well, I mean, expressing opinion is one thing, but they certainly don't have the right, as the rules of the game are within the Spanish constitution, to declare independence. Now, this was triggered by the Spanish government, with Prime Minister Rajoy, asking, first, you can't just go to the Senate and say we want these powers. First, there has to be communication with the regional authority to ask them, to explain what they're doing and are they outside the law and can they please rectify. And so Mr. Rajoy asked Puigdemont if Catalonia had declared independence, and his reply was equivocal. He didn't really confirm or deny it. And now the situation, what's really going to be fascinating is, as we said, it's on Friday, the Senate debate and vote. Now, Mr. Puigdemont has one sort of last option, if you like, before we get to the clash next weekend that he's officially dismissed. He could, and he has threatened to, go back to the Catalan Parliament and, before it's sort of emasculated by these measures, and put independence to a vote there.
And that would be UDI, wouldn't it? A Universal Declaration of Independence, which presumably, James, would mean that violence of some kind would be unavoidable.
Well, I mean, I sometimes worry about this, and I voice this fear, but, the Catalan independence movement always says, no, it's not possible. But I think that, some sort of unrest would be inevitable. Spain's chief prosecutor is preparing sort of treason charges, really, against Mr. Puigdemont. There would perhaps be some move to try and have him arrested if Parliament, if he took a unilateral declaration to Parliament and they actually voted on it. So to remind listeners, it was sort of floated as a possibility in Parliament after the referendum, but there wasn't a formal vote. So, therefore it wasn't really a declaration.
No.
So, yes, it's quite possible to imagine pretty serious disturbances in the street, but actual violence and there's talk of another civil war, let's hope that's still...
I mean, we all hope that's not...
Still an exaggeration.
We all hope that's not the case. Tell me, the European Union, who were studiously quiet after all the police brutality a few weeks ago, what is their position on this now?
Well, the European Union has, the main leaders of the European Union, with exceptions such as the Belgian Prime Minister, have rallied around the Spanish government. We saw that in the summit last weekend. We heard Mr. Macron, we heard Merkel, and the Commission President, all saying basically that they supported Spain, they support the Spanish Constitution and constitutional order in Spain.
And that was Theresa May's position too, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so, yes. Exactly. Really, they're treating this as an internal matter, I suppose, just as you might get complaints from opposition politicians in Hungary about, the election rules or freedom of the press there, but the European Union doesn't seem able to intervene in these kind of issues.
Well, they're very good, James, at criticising the Hungarian government and criticising the Polish government and often criticising the British government, but the Spanish government, it would seem, can do no wrong.
It is also this can of worms, isn't it, of secession. I think there are other countries that have regions that, could they think would get restive as well.
Well, that was the view that we got there from Madrid, and that's what the government is saying, that, they're using necessary force, as they have over the last few weeks. They're enforcing the rule of law, and Carles Puigdemont, the president of Catalonia, could well finish up in prison on effectively treason charges. I have to say, when you hear there's a leader of a nationalist, separatist movement in southern Europe, you sort of conjure up this figure of some sort of very fiery, noisy, big public orator. And actually, this guy, when you listen to him, comes across as the most mild-mannered nationalist I think I've ever heard of. But let's get the view from Barcelona. Let's get the other side of the argument, because, you know, we're going to debate. Is this an attack on democracy, or is it the correct interpretation of Spanish law? Let's get a view from Barcelona. Let's go to Jim Kent. He's the owner of Barcelona City FM. He's lived in Barcelona for a few years. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning. Now, I saw the pictures of reportedly hundreds of thousands of Catalans out on the streets of Barcelona yesterday. Tell me about that.
Yes, we had about 500,000 Catalans. Now, the main tenet of that particular protest was concerning political prisoners, because the two Jordis, as they now know, they were the leader of the Catalan National Assembly. They were arrested about a week ago and are still being held by Madrid authorities, and people wanted to express their anger about that. And I would say, don't underestimate the strength of passion here of the Catalans in this debate. Even though the rule of law on one side might look as though it's against them, they are getting ready. This protest is not going away. It's not going anywhere.
No, and of course, when they did hold that referendum, and I know lots of people were stopped from voting, but of the 43% turnout, about 90% voted to secede, didn't they?
Yeah, that's correct. So in the minds of the nationalists, they feel as though they have a mandate. They know that the vote was not perfect, but nevertheless, they would say that there's a vast swath of individuals here in Catalonia who not only want to be independent, believe they have a right, a democratic right, to be independent. And in the address given by Puigdemont last night, he says Madrid have gone back to the days of Franco in terms of enforcing their will over this region.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I find it rather difficult myself to disagree with that point of view, because surely people are allowed to express an opinion. And, of course, the way we dealt with this, with Scottish nationalism, was to have a referendum. And that strikes me as being the best thing. But let me just ask you, Jim, sort of look in the crystal ball, and this is difficult, but next Friday, Article 155 gets debated and voted on in the Spanish Senate. We've been told this morning from Madrid that's pretty much a formality. So then the next day, or the day after, the Spanish state starts to take over government buildings. What are people such as the police force, such as the civil servants, I mean, are they going to accept that suddenly they're under direct rule from Madrid rather than their own Catalan senior officers that they had the day before?
Yeah, you mentioned the police, and for sure that's a very, very interesting issue. What we actually expect is to see the local police effectively divide down the middle, because here in Catalonia, with the Mossos police force, many of them are very ardent nationalists, and there's no way that they will ever take orders directly from Madrid. So we're creating the potential of seeing police on both sides of the protest.
Do you, Jim, do you fear this could turn ugly?
I do, and I think the key point will be this issue of political prisoners is a really hot issue here. So if Madrid continue, and if they arrest any of the political leaders, including even Puigdemont himself, it's very unpredictable to see the response. Without doubt, you'll see 1 million people on the streets, but what that will lead to is hard to know. I mean, I've spoken to many Catalans in recent days, and many of these people, they grew up in a time when the Basque separatist issue was violent. Here in Catalonia, it was always peaceful.
Yes.
But these people now tell me, now we understand why they had to go to such violent lengths, because Madrid won't engage in dialogue.
Yeah, and is Puigdemont right? In your view, you're there, you've got a business in Barcelona. Do you think he's right when he says that the behaviour of Rajoy, the Prime Minister, is an attack on democracy?
Rajoy has been incredibly heavy-handed, but you do mention business. This prolonged nationalistic issue, it's really hurting the economy. For sure, there are less tourists here on the streets than normal.
Yep.
And I should just mention that the tapas is still good, the sun is shining, and Gaudi is still here. So tourists don't need to worry about that. But yeah, there's a knock on the real day-to-day businesses, and so you'll find they'll be pushing against Puigdemont. Let's have a resolution as quickly as possible, please.
Yeah,
for the
I get
sake
it.
of the economy.
Jim Kent, owner of Barcelona City FM, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, folks, you've listened to two sides of an argument. You've heard the arguments for the Spanish imposing direct rule. You've heard the arguments from Barcelona, well, both sides of the argument from Barcelona, but, you know, I think Jim Kent there saying to you, don't underestimate the passion. 500,000 people on the streets yesterday, already political prisoners, this very serious situation. So do you agree when Puigdemont says, do you agree that this is an attack on democracy, or is it just Spanish law being obeyed? Your views in a moment. You've heard both sides of the argument, so it's your turn now, and that's the point about this show. It's the point about LBC. It's the only medium on a Sunday where you get the chance to give us your opinions. Do you think what is happening in Catalonia, with local autonomy on the verge of being suspended and the Spanish state about to come in, take over government buildings, do you see this as an attack on democracy, or is it just the Spanish law being obeyed? Call me on 0345 6060 973 to give me your view. And if you're in Spain, please call and we will give you priority. Absolutely. Of course, equally, you can text your views on this to 84850. You can tweet your opinions using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch this live on Facebook and comment there. My first caller on this subject is Nick, who is calling from Harlow. Nick, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you again.
Good to you. So what do you think, Nick?
I don't want to give an opinion as to whether this is an attack on democracy, but what I do want to point out is a very important thing, which is the EU response to it. Now, whether the Spanish are violating their democratic principles, it's a debatable point. Whether they're violating their own laws, yes, they are. The referendum that was held was not lawful, but it was not illegal. Okay? But contrast, for instance, the EU's approach to Yugoslavia, particularly Krajina in Croatia in 1992.
Oh, well, they jumped the gun in recognising it, didn't they?
Well, of course. They were like, yes, come, join us, be part of us, we want your stuff. Whereas where a particular breakaway separatist part of the country goes, no, we don't want to be part of this anymore, they go, oops, that's a bit of a problem, and no, you can't. So it's not really internally logical and consistent, is it?
Actually, Nick, it is logical and consistent, totally, because the Europe...
Depending on how evil you think they are.
Well, I've been there a long time, and I remember Juncker's predecessor, Mr. Barroso, the former Maoist from Portugal, who now is, I think he's the deputy chairman of Goldman Sachs globally. I mean, how you go from Maoism to Goldman Sachs, I mean, it's a heck of a leap.
What's the difference?
Well, sometimes the circles meet, perhaps, yeah. No, what was it? I mean, he said that the European Union was an empire. He said, we're building an empire. And, Nick, I think what happened 25 years ago, I think the European Union actually assisted in the destruction in Yugoslavia. I think...
Yes, they did.
I think its actions...
And they made a complete hash of it.
Well, I think it's worse than... No, I think it's worse than that, Nick. Because, you know, they always say, look at us, we're wonderful in Brussels. I mean, we've stopped the Germans coming over the Rhine again. Well, the Germans were never going to...
No, they haven't.
I mean, well, that's an economic argument. But the idea that the European Union is all about peace, and what I see is much of what they did with the recognition of Croatia, etc., actually helping to provoke some of the terrible things that happened in the Balkans. And then they decided they want to expand it eastwards into the Ukraine, which led to the overthrow of an elected prime minister. So, but I don't think they are about peace, but the point is, the consistency is, they want to build the empire, and they can see these Catalan separatists don't just want to leave... You've gone.
There is one more point I'd like to add in, and I run the risk here of being a tinfoil hat person. So this is getting into a very risky area. But consider, the logical outcome of this is going to be incredible unrest in Catalonia. The Spanish government is going to intervene. nasty things are going to happen. It's not going to end very well. It's probably not going to end terribly. I mean, I don't think we're looking at another Yugoslavia. But I would postulate that this will be the first deployment of a combined EU army to assist a recognised member of the EU in keeping internal order.
Well, they won't need it. They won't need the army, Nick. I'll tell you why, because they've got something called Eurogen 4, the Euro Gendarmerie Force. It's existed for a few years. At the moment...
I'm aware of that, Nigel.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment...
And you successfully deploy it, isn't that a massive PR coup?
I think that in many ways that may well be true. I think there is no point in having European armies or European police forces or European special riot squads. There's no point having them unless you actually use them. And of course, for those that want statehood for the European Union, the very act of doing these things is part of it. I mean, I remember Verhofstadt.
It would be a great test case, wouldn't it?
You know, I remember Verhofstadt in 2012 when France and the UK started bombing Libya. I remember Guy Verhofstadt, who, you know, is now the European Parliament's chief negotiator, you know, banging the table saying we must bomb as the European Union, not as individual member states. So you know, they want these rights of statehood, and they want, they want to act as nations act. So yeah, I've certainly got some concerns about that. But these Catalan separatists, Nick, they are fiercely Eurosceptic, and I think that, above all, you know, is what...
Is a risk.
I think that's what they're scared of.
It's a risk and it's an opportunity for the EU.
An opportunity for them to as you say, use their forces, flex their muscles, but the risk is... I mean, frankly, Nick, I'd say this to you. If the Catalans were to break away by some means as a completely independent state, independent of Spain, independent of the European Union, if that was to happen, that would make Brexit look like a Sunday afternoon. Yeah, and that's exactly the point, isn't it? That is exactly the point. Nick, listen. Well, no, absolutely. But look, the point you've made about the sheer, you know, on the face of it, the sheer inconsistency with recognising Croatia, aiding and abetting the breakup of Yugoslavia, but taking the opposite opinion when it comes to Spain. I think, given the sort of broad historical swathe of this, I think you've got this absolutely bang on the money. Nick from Harlow, I thank you very much indeed. Natalie comes through on Facebook and says, you do realise the EU is not interested in sorting out Europe. It wants everyone to suffer. Sorry, Greece. Sorry, Spain. Well, I'm not sure, Natalie. I mean, I'm Eurosceptic, but I'm not sure they actually willfully want people out there to seriously be hurt. I'm not sure they would, you know, I mean, come on, France, Germany. Okay, you can be really cynical and say those guys want to run the European Union for their own benefit. You know, they want this to be a political union that they're in control of. I don't think any of them ever have actually wished ill and wished suffering, but they're prepared to see suffering in Greece to maintain the integrity of the euro. They're prepared to see companies that export to the United Kingdom perhaps have to start paying, the customers have to start paying tariffs, and they do that because they want to preserve the idea that no country can actually leave the European Union. So they do things at times that are against the interests of people, against the interests of companies, and against the interests of countries in the name of this larger supranational structure. But I don't think they ever from the start willfully set out to do something that would genuinely hurt people. Christian says on Facebook, on the Spanish attacks against democratic voters, imagine what a European army would do. Well, Christian, you are backing up the point that was made there by Nick. Not only do they have a European army, they've got their own, effectively, they've got their own riot squads, and they're in training. There are about 8 or 9 member states are part of this, but it would be used in extremist to deal with violence. And there are many, I must say, there must be people today listening to this in Ireland and countries like that, countries that have been neutral countries, and yet they now find themselves part of a union that is militarising, that has an expansionist foreign policy, and I think many people in countries like Ireland would be very, very worried indeed. And on Twitter, I get No, that's for the previous one. But listen, I'll take any opinions you've got on this. You've heard both sides of the argument. Is this an attack on democracy, or is it just the Spanish enforcing their own rules? Tell me what you think. Call me on 0345 60 60 973, and particularly if you're in Catalonia or Spain, you will go right to the top of the list. Well, as the Spanish government prepares to take away autonomy from Catalonia, I'm asking you, is this oppression? Is this crushing democracy? Or is it just the correct way for the Spanish to interpret and use their law? And we do have some breaking news. Spain says that British expats will be allowed to continue living in the country even if the UK leaves the European Union without a Brexit withdrawal deal. Spain's Foreign Minister Alfonso Dastis says the lives of ordinary Britons will not be disrupted. There is another Remainer argument blown out of the water. You said if we voted Brexit, they'd all be rounded up in prison ships and sent back to Portsmouth. Complete and utter baloney, as it always was going to be. I wonder what would happen, frankly, to the economy in much of southern Spain if it wasn't for the British expats down there spending their money. I'm also fascinated by the timing of this. Fascinated. Is this Spain trying to show us and the others what really nice guys they are before they send the troops and the police in to take over the Catalan Parliament and all the organs of state? I wonder. Also, we're getting reports that Catalan separatists would surround the Parliament to prevent any arrest of Carles Puigdemont, their president. So I think whichever way you look at this, the tensions are getting greater and greater, and the risk of something unpleasant happening, it can't be ignored. Look, already there are 2 political prisoners in the space of the last week. This is how Spain is behaving. They say, after they've taken autonomy, 6 months or so on, they'll hold fresh elections. To me, the only way you can deal with this is to have a full, free and fair referendum in Catalonia and let the Catalans make their decision. If you try and suppress, particularly with violence, if you try and suppress separatist views or separatist debates, all you will do is to feed it. That's my view. Angela is calling me from Norfolk. Angela, good morning.
Hello, good morning. I listen to LBC all the time, and this is the first time I've ever phoned, so...
Is it? So what's...
quite a meaningful subject.
Well, no, thank you, Angela. And what has made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm half British, half Catalan, and I have lived in the UK more than half of my life, but of course I still follow the developments, quite keenly. And I actually studied history, and I have a family who are very political. People died in the Civil War, the usual Catalan stories of, great misery. My feeling about all of this, and I was very young when it happened, so I'm only going on, history lectures, etc., that I've had, is that the Spanish Constitution was formed at a time when Franco just died and everybody was very scared, and I just don't think it's relevant anymore. I think it's not really... it's just not a modern democracy and how it should operate. I think...
Yeah, this was written in 1978, Angela, when so sort of, was it 2 or 3 years after Franco had died is when they finalised it? Yeah.
And, there was coup d'etat, as you know, and, everybody was very scared, as they are now. I mean, even I, who have always been a fervent independentist, I'm getting very scared of what's happening. But at the same time, I think it's not fair. And if they really weren't scared about what potentially could happen and us declaring ourselves independent, then why on earth would they not allow a referendum like you just said we should have?
Well, I simply can't see, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, that when you had the Irish separatist movement, the uprising in 1916, they were very much in a minority. But the way the British dealt with that uprising, the way they rounded up the ringleaders and shot them. Now, I'm not suggesting they'll shoot Puigdemont, but they may well put him in prison for treason. How you deal with these things, I think makes a massive difference. And I think the Spanish government are looking like thugs and bully boys supported by their mates in Brussels. It's ugly. Do you have, Angela, family still living in Catalonia?
Of course, most of my family. And the thing that we always ask ourselves is, why on earth have we not been treated in the same way as the Basques? I mean, they have a much higher degree of autonomy.
Yes.
And realistically, Nigel, the only reason why we haven't is because it's a bigger nation, and financially they rely a lot more on us. And it's not about money. You know, most of our friends are Spanish or half Spanish or Spanish origin. We don't hate Spanish people. We never have done. We just don't like to be treated unfairly by the Spanish government. And that's really the full stop of it.
No. And I get that. Angela, if it came to it, and there was a full, free and fair referendum, which in the end there will be, in my view. There has to be. I just don't see this can go on the way that it is in the 21st century. But do you honestly think, given that every business will threaten to leave, given that you'll be told, even if you changed your minds, EU membership wouldn't be possible, do you actually think in a referendum, despite all the threats, I mean, sort of, rather like the Project Fear you saw in this country, but times 10, do you think the Catalonian people still could vote for independence?
I would hope so. And I also would really draw the parallels with Brexit. There's a lot of scaremongering.
Yes.
And the thing is that Catalans are really quite culturally different from Spanish people. In Catalonia, the ambition is to be a bourgeois, to have money, to build lovely houses. In Spain, the ambition historically was always to be a person of leisure. I mean, I'm not saying that's the case now.
Right.
Spanish people value their leisure far and above anybody from Catalonia. And of course, you know, culturally, we're all becoming, you know, more and more similar. Everyone in the world is becoming more and more similar. But there's still differences, and I really believe that the majority of companies in Catalonia, when it actually came to it, would say, well, no, hang on a minute, we are Catalan, and we have to defend our country. And I hope that would be the case anyway.
Angela, great phone call, long time LBC listener, the first time she's ever picked up the phone, and thank you for that insight. The Catalonian people should be allowed a binding referendum to leave or remain. People all over the world want more say on local issues and not a one-size-fits-all big central government like the EU, says Darren from Bristol. Well, that's what's got the EU having kittens, Darren, is that here we've got a genuine independence movement, not a phony one like the Scots Nats, who, they couldn't say enough nice things about Scotland in Brussels. They wanted Scotland to leave the United Kingdom, divide and rule. But of course, Alex Salmond wanted very much at the time of that referendum for Scotland to be part of the EU. In fact, previous to that, he'd wanted Scotland to join the Euro. And he will be hosting a show this afternoon between 3 and 6 on LBC. Perhaps you might ask him about that. I wonder what he'd have to say. No surprise, the Spanish will not deport Brits. We take our own money there and support their country, says Johnny on Twitter. Yeah, well, absolutely we do. And yet, I mean, I was met in the referendum with these moronic arguments, as I say, as if they were all going to be rounded up. Mr. Farage, what would you say if Cornwall went independent because they want to be separate from England? Your opinion on that? Keith, not a cat's chance in hell, mate. There is a Cornish separatist movement. It has a few hundred members and no more than that. Ramona's all backed Catalonia at the start. Then it was pointed out that the Catalans are anti-EU. Now they are all anti-Catalonia. Well, I think they are. Alfred is calling from East Ham. Alfred, good morning.
Hello, Nigel. I think Rajoy is trying to deal with this the way the Spanish government tried to deal with, do you remember the revolt, the Milans del Bosch, the general who tried to revolt? I mean, this is nothing like that. I think this constitution was probably promulgated to deal with that former case. This is people asking for a say in who governs them. And I think the trouble is, if they'd done what the Catalans wanted years ago, they could have sat down quietly out of the public eye and how are we going to do it with Rajoy or whoever was in, and say, well, how are we going to manage this? Quietly, an opinion poll, a referendum, call it what you like, see what happens, and then work out how to go. I think Rajoy's got himself in a position now where he can't back down. I mean, they had 2 elections to get a government there, didn't they?
They did.
They weren't exactly. So
why, Alfred? Why, Alfred, is Mrs. May backing him as strongly as she did when she was asked this question on Friday at the summit in Brussels?
I don't think she wants to rock the boat in the middle of all the. She doesn't know which way the
the Brexit negotiations are going. I don't think she wants to be on the wrong side, I think, so at the moment.
Just go with the flow. Go with the flow. Support police brutality and the denial of democracy. I mean, if you look at it in those terms, it's pretty awful, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I spent a fair bit of time in Catalonia in the 80s. I was travelling around there with an elderly veteran of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion of the International Brigades.
Wow.
That's talking to people there. He's a lovely guy, American guy.
Yeah.
And he was fated there. And the stories we were getting from people, elderly guys in little villages. And I was talking to a guy who used to runs a cafe, I don't know if he's still there now, runs a cafe in Girona. And he said, look, I'll speak to you in Catalan, in French, in Italian, a bit of German, if you like. He said, but I will not speak Castellano or Spanish. He said, I could have been arrested in the street for 40 years if I spoke Catalan.
I know.
That still rankles. And quietly.
They've been sort of that culture had been suppressed, hasn't it? Alfred, great call, great stories. Must have been fascinating back in the 1980s when there were still people alive in serious numbers who'd fought in that civil war to go there. I'm asking you: is taking away autonomy from Catalonia complete oppression and the death of democracy, or is it just a fair thing for the Spanish government to be doing, given Article 155 of their constitution, which they intend to trigger? But before that, the World Health Organization has appointed the 93-year-old Robert Mugabe as a goodwill ambassador. That's right. The chap that has completely wrecked Zimbabwe, wrecked their healthcare system, who himself goes out of the country for his healthcare, and led hundreds of thousands into starvation, and he's going to be a goodwill ambassador for the World Health Organization. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he thought it was a bad April Fool's Day joke. Well, we are told now that the WHO are rethinking that decision. Well, can you think a little harder, please? And what is it with all these OECDs and EUs and WHOs? Are all of these supranational organisations just mad? Is it because they're living on taxpayers' money and they frankly stopped thinking? I don't know, but that one is just stone bonkers. Now, Mogmentum, Mogmania, Moggy, Mog. These are the kind of things I get sent to me every day on Twitter and text when I'm doing the show here. Well, tomorrow, for those of you that are Mog fanatics, and for those of you indeed that aren't, he's going to be here on LBC at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. No, not as a guest. He's going to be standing in for James O'Brien. He'll be here between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. tomorrow. So listen, ring. I think it's going to be absolutely enormous fun. He's doing it tomorrow, and there'll be different guest presenters every single day this week, names of which I think are being withheld at this stage. But it's Mog tomorrow for 3 hours. I've got to tell you, I'm definitely tuning in at 10 o'clock. I think it's going to be terrific. Right, back to this question of Catalonia, and I'm going to Dennis in Manchester. Dennis, good morning.
Hi, good morning there, Nigel. I'm calling really, excuse me, I have a really bad cough and cold
bad
here.
Luck. Bad luck. You and the Prime Minister, bad luck, Dennis, you know.
Hopefully I won't spill too many more words. I agree fully with Angela, what she's just said.
Yes.
In effect, I'm married to a Catalan lady. We lived over here for 38 years. She's worked in this country the whole time, done very well. And we have family back in Spain. We've just come back from Barcelona yesterday, after 2 weeks.
Yesterday?
Yes. The people there, in effect, they're just entirely ordinary people, and they're the ones who are behind this move, because they've had enough. The simple fact is, Catalonia is a region of Spain. Technically, yes, the referendum was completely illegal. It was against the Constitution. But as Angela said, the Constitution was written in 1978, 3 years after a 40-year-long dictatorship had taken place. And with a view to getting something which was acceptable, it was signed and agreed for then. With the internet and the way the world's changed, everything has changed dramatically since then. Last Monday, the Spanish government, in a very oppressive, heavy-handed way, put into prison 2 leaders of technically cultural groups. Yes, they're pro-separatists. They put them in prison, the 2 Georges.
Yep.
And On the day after, and knowing something was going on, I just went from the town 15 miles outside Barcelona into town to see what was going to be happening. I could not believe it. I got on the train. I thought I was going to a Neil Diamond concert. There were hundreds on the train of ordinary people, every age, but mainly middle-aged and above.
So Dennis, often when we think of separatist movements, independence movements, not always, but often, there is a tinge of extremism or the threat of the use of violence. One thinks of the Basque region in Spain, where there's been plenty of violence. Are you, in your own mind, convinced that the Catalan separatist movement are genuinely good people?
The one word which you'll hear from all of the politicians and all of the speakers to the Catalans is pacifista. We are people of peace. When they had the terrorist attack 2 months ago, the chant that they did against terrorists was, we are people of peace, som gender, the power. We are people of peace. And the simple fact is that they will always avoid violence. They didn't engage in any violence when the police were beating them. They put their hands up in the air. There was 200,000 people on a Tuesday night, all with banners waving and appealing for the freedom of these two guys who've been put in prison.
Yeah,
and that was on 24 hours after.
And Dennis, when you flew back yesterday, was everything normal at the airport and everything happening as it should?
Yeah, yes, it is. But we took a walk down to the Ramblas along the coast, and we saw the troop ship which is out there.
Yes.
It has the picture of cartoons there. There are thousands and thousands of guys on there. Now these are fully testosterone soldiers brought in from other parts of Spain. They've been on this ship for 2 weeks. There are rumours that it is both disgusting, smelly. There are rats there. They have nothing to do. Do you think they're going to be nice and peaceful when they're given a job to do, go and look after gentle people?
Very thought-provoking. Dennis from Manchester, thank you for your eyewitness accounts of what's been going on there. My next caller is Nemesio, who is Spanish. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Yeah, it's about these two guys, the two Jordis that are in jail.
Yes.
Yeah, they're not in jail for nothing. A judge ordered, before the referendum, ordered the police to search some places where they were, the Generalitat were hiding the boxes and the voting boxes, etc. The police went in, and with 4 or 5 cars, police car. Are you there?
Yes, yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah. And these two guys jumped on the police cars with big loudspeakers. I saw that on the television. You need to watch these images.
Yeah.
And they're inciting the crowd. The crowd smashed the police cars, 4 or 5 police cars. They set fire to the police cars. And the Spanish police is inside the building searching for these papers, etc. And the Mossos de Escuadra, is the Catalan police, could not protect them. They were scared inside. So for this reason...
Okay, so you feel, Nemesio, these guys have behaved badly, and yes. I listened very carefully to what you had to say there. On the bigger question here,
yes,
and we've tried over the course of the last hour to listen to both sides of this argument. Ultimately, if Article 155 gets passed by the Senate on Friday, which it looks like it's going to be, yes, and autonomy is removed, we do potentially have a pretty horrible situation. Do you? I mean, I think the solution to this would be you set a date 9 months down the road to have a referendum and solve this once and for all. I mean, am I right about that, or can you think of a better way?
Well, I think there should be elections, so the country, the Catalonia can vote for a new Catalonian government.
Well,
these people are extremists.
Well, what if, Nemesio, what if these elections were held and the Catalans voted for a parliament that was even more pro-independence than the one that's there now? Well,
I doubt it. I don't think it will happen. But
okay.
Still, they would be under the power of the tribunal. The power in Spain.
Yeah, well, the power in Spain, Nemesio, is certainly being felt, and I thank you. Scott says the UK should watch what happens in Spain. This is just the trailer. No, Scott, I disagree with that absolutely fundamentally. And a question here that I can't answer. Where do the Balearic Islands stand on the issue of Catalonia? Are they Spanish or Catalan? I don't know the answer to that. Someone let me know on tomorrow evening's show, please, what the solution is for that. You've been listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show.